if you've watched the Grayzone, if you followed us, you've seen that from the start we've been calling out this scam that there was sexual violence committed by Hamas militants on October 7th. This has been going on for a long time. These allegations were rolled out precisely at a time when Israel was under, global scrutiny for its atrocities in Gaza. And this has been deliberately used to try to deflect from that, to deflect for the horrors going on in front of our eyes. And now, though, the Times, the New York Times, which put out a story in late December, which we debunked at the Grayzone, is walking back some of its core claims. And this comes via The Intercept. The Intercept did a story about this, picking up on the reporting we did, which we're going to talk more about in a second, because they've done so, I think, in a really disingenuous way by not crediting the people who debunked the story that they're now following up on. But they did elicit some important admissions from the New York Times. And one of them is that the Times is now walking back its initial claim. So this is what the Times tells The Intercept now. They say that on October 7th, quote, there may have been systematic use of sexual assault. That's what a New York Times reporter told The Intercept. But that's not what the New York Times said in its story, which is still up. It says that they've uncovered, quote, a pattern of rape, mutilation, and extreme brutality against women in the attacks on Israel. So there's no qualifier there. There's no, they may have used a pattern of rape and sexual violence. They're declaring that Hamas did, but now because they've become under so much scrutiny, including from the Grayzone, they're walking that back. And, the impetus for this retraction, this tacit retraction by the Times, was that one of their contributors to this story, an Israeli woman named Anat Schwarz, has come under scrutiny because she was caught liking genocidal anti-Palestinian posts on Twitter. She was caught by the Twitter account Zay Squirrel, which then The Intercept followed up on.
So we'll sort of start from the beginning here. We came out right out of the gate when this story came out, exposing demonstrably false testimonies by supposed witnesses, inconsistencies in those testimonies, impossibilities, and discrepancies between actual evidence and what was claimed in that article. What we found was a really unprofessional rehearsal of an attempt to produce atrocity propaganda on behalf of Israel to justify its ongoing genocide in Gaza, which is infuriating. And I said from the beginning that this was one of the worst cases of journalistic malpractice on its face that I've seen since Judith Miller and her WMD lies that were published in the New York Times, fed to her by Bush administration neocons. And I also said that before we were done with him, Jeffrey Gelman, the lead author of this article, would have to answer for what he did. So Jeffrey Gelman was sort of compelled to issue a follow-up piece, which was obviously a response to us, as well as the Electronic Intifada and Mondo Weiss, who were also leading the way on debunking this article. And we all cite each other. We've all been citing each other all along. No one's trying to steal credit or outdo each other. We just believe in what we're doing. And Jeffrey Gelman, instead of acknowledging inconsistencies, the whole article was framed within the context of a looming UN investigation into Hamas sexual violence. And he goes back to his sources and asks them about inconsistencies. For example, Roz Cohen, who we exposed. And Roz Cohen won't speak to him. He says, I'm too traumatized. He tries to reach Sapir, who's the Israeli police's key witness, even though the Israeli police has acknowledged there is no forensic evidence or any evidence, physical evidence to support anything she said or witnesses. And this is someone talking about 3 decapitated women, talking about witnessing several gang rapes, Hamas militants cutting off breasts with box knives and playing with them. And this elicited one of the wildest responses, which The Intercept didn't mention, which was that the Israeli police actually found the heads, and they said it in passing, and they found the location of the heads. Right, Aaron?
Yes, they did. Here, we will show it. This is amazing. So Gelman is now forced to respond to those of us who debunked him. And again, as Max said, he does not actually cite or name us, but it's so obvious he's responding to all the points that we raised. Not all of them, but some of them. Some points he just couldn't respond to. Like, for example, his response doesn't mention Zaka at all, which was the scam rescue group who he relied on in part for his story. And they were caught spreading other atrocity propaganda. And he couldn't find a way to defend that, so he just ignores that. But on this issue of Sapir claiming to have seen 3 beheaded women, all of a sudden, out of the blue, Jeffrey Gettleman, and going back to reconfirm his story, has discovered from Israeli sources that 3 severed heads were found farther away, near the bodies of assailants and military fatigues, Israeli officials said, without providing more detail. So it's a throwaway line that this critical piece of forensic evidence, not 1, or not 2, but 3 severed heads, have all of a sudden been found. But sorry, we can't give you any more detail. There's nothing more to say about this. And by the way, this claim has not appeared in Israeli media. So this was a Gettleman exclusive. Somehow Gettleman got the exclusive that Israeli police managed to find a missing piece of evidence, which is 3 severed heads, which were not there before, which happened to help validate the claims of one of his discredited witnesses. And there's nothing more to be said about it. Sorry, we can't give you any more detail. And he was
haven't heard about it since.
Haven't heard about this. He doesn't follow up. It's like this amazing discovery. It's like it would be like OJ claiming, I don't know, that he found the killer somewhere else. But sorry, I can't give you any more detail. Like that's it. I'm sorry to use OJ references, but it's just, that's a familiar one for everyone to know. It's so ridiculous. And that's what he tried to spin. And on the point about Raz Cohen saying he's too traumatized now, all of a sudden. So he wasn't too traumatized by October 7th to initially give testimony where he didn't even mention seeing any rape. And then he came up with that afterwards. He wasn't too traumatized when he took part in fashion shows and photo spreads after October 7th. And he certainly wasn't even too traumatized on October 7th to take a smiling selfie at the same time as he later claimed he was witnessing rape. And now all of a sudden that he's coming under scrutiny, he's all of a sudden too traumatized to speak to Jeffrey Gettleman anymore. It's
and then we have the family members of the woman in the black dress, Gal Abdush, who is the main exhibit of Gettleman and team, who condemned the New York Times, said there's no way she could have been sexually assaulted by Hamas when she was killed. It's pretty clear she was either killed by an RPG fired by a Hamas militant at her car, which was totally destroyed, or she was one of the many, many, many Israeli civilians who were killed by Israeli attack helicopters and tanks as part of the mass Hannibal directive that is confirmed to have taken place on October 7th. But Jeffrey Gettleman goes to her sister, Miral Alter, and calls her up and actually says, it appears that he's trying to pressure her into recanting what she said on social media, and, interviews her about that, and doesn't get her to recant, or her brother-in-law. So basically it was a big fail by Gettleman to try to recover his reputation. And this was, as The Intercept reported, and we'll talk about this article next, as the Intercept's Ryan Grimm and Daniel Boguslaw reported that the New York Times had canceled an episode of its daily podcast about Gettleman and the team's reporting that was supposed to basically affirm this investigation as just this powerful look at how Hamas was so savage and, set the stage for them winning Pulitzer Prizes and many other prizes. So that was very damaging to the New York Times. And then we have this new element here, which is that Gettleman relied on 2 researchers, Anat Schwarz and Adam Sella, who were both very young. I tweeted about how Adam Sella, the day after his report came out, was thrilled about how it was on the front page, and that was his response to it. He got hammered and deleted that. He turns out to be the nephew of Anat Schwarz. And Anat Schwarz turns out to be an Israeli former military intelligence officer with negligible to no experience in journalism, at least when she started doing this article, who is basically used as Jeffrey Gettleman's fixer and his helper. So Gettleman comes in and writes the master narrative and prepares it in this compelling way. And then he goes and sells it on like panels with Hillary Clinton. But Anat Schwarz and Adam Seller were doing the legwork.
In the service of Israeli Hasbara, as they admitted.
Yes, thank you. I'm so glad you brought this one up.
Yeah.
You want to?
Well, so this is from Ynet, an Israeli site, speaking to a photographer who took a picture of one of the people who Gettleman said was a rape victim, even though her family said that she wasn't, Gal Abdush. And this photographer says that they were approached by Adam Sella and Anat Schwarz, the New York Times journalists, and this is what this photographer says they claimed. They called me again and again and explained how important it is to Israeli Hasbara. And Hasbara means propaganda. So basically, these two so-called reporters were acknowledging that their mission in doing this story was to help Israeli propaganda.
That to me is one of the most scandalous elements of Jeffrey Gettleman's team. It hasn't actually been figured into any of the Intercept's reporting or much of the reporting we've seen about this. And, they've been focusing on this leg of the scandal, but it really shows, first of all, this video doesn't prove anything like Gettleman and his team claim. And they compelled the person who took the video to participate in their investigation by promising that it would basically help Israel justify its genocidal assault on Gaza. That's enormously scandalous.
Yeah.
And then you have the whole identity of Anat Schwarz and her likes on Twitter and elsewhere. I guess this was like a loose end I failed to tie up. I was looking into her background, and then others came along and did more in-depth investigating, like Z Squirrel, who found that she had liked a post calling for turning Gaza into a slaughterhouse after October 7th, something she's never explained. She actually said, I don't know, you could go to her account, and this is, I think, her pinned tweet or at the top of her account. She refers to it kind of as an inadvertent like, or like it was sort of accidental that she liked it. And she liked a post about beheaded babies, which has been discredited. But here you have someone who I guess is like 24, no journalistic experience, is thrust into one of the most historically controversial events, October 7th, by one of the most important newspapers or media publications in the world, doesn't seem to grasp the seriousness of it. And then on a podcast goes and discloses that she had called hospital after hospital in Israel and could not find any rape victims or sexual assault victims from October 7th, and describes just all the work she's doing to try to prove a thesis that had no evidence to support it up front.
Yeah, the Intercept picked up on this. She gave a podcast interview where she acknowledged that she contacted every rape crisis center, every Israeli hospital, just every possible facility that would maybe have the intake for a sexual assault victim, and she could find none. And the Times now admits this. The Times says she was told there had been no complaints made of sexual assaults. And yet, even though there was zero complaints of sexual assaults, they still went ahead and found the story by relying on basically purported witnesses making up fanciful tales. That's pretty much what the story came down to for the New York Times.
Yep. So now Anat Schwarz has sort of become the center of the scandal, and the New York Times investigated her. They cleared her because she's a Israeli Jew and not a Palestinian. You know, the Palestinians were all fired after October 7th across the board in media. Muslims were fired for having sympathy to Palestinians. You know, they were considered Nazis burrowing within these media institutions. Now, after 140 days of genocide, someone who liked a post calling for Gaza to be turned into a slaughterhouse was investigated. And, you know, I'm glad this happened, and credit to everyone who scrutinized Anat Schwarz. but it's not enough. And in many ways, I've said it before, she reminds me of Lindy England, the Abu Ghraib torturer, who was a young woman who the Bush administration blamed for its entire torture program, when Jeffrey Gelman is the one who should be punished for this. And I've said from the beginning, he should be professionally punished. He was the lead author. He put his name on this. He didn't do any vetting. He didn't do any fact checking. He didn't do what we did. You know, if this article, sorry to cut in, but if this article had come to the Grayzone and it had been about Israeli mass rape in Gaza, and I saw the same inconsistencies from witnesses, I wouldn't publish it.
Well, yeah, I mean, because you have minimal standards for journalism, but this is why it's not even just about Gelman. What about his editors? They know exactly what he was doing. They could read his story before. I mean, certainly that story was edited from people in senior positions at the New York Times. How did they allow this to go to print? So he should be fired, but along with them as well. This is a Iraq WMD level scam.
Yes. And when you say Iraq WMD level, it's something that has been used to justify a catastrophic war. This is one of the key propaganda devices that Israel's deployed, especially targeting Joe Biden's progressive and feminist base. And here is the scandal deepening even further. The New York Times is conducting a leak investigation. This is according to a Vanity Fair reporter, a rare move for the paper following the Intercept's report on a yet-to-air episode of The Daily addressing claims of sexual violence committed by Hamas on October 7th. So the New York Times is looking for those who exposed that the paper's leadership and editors did not consider credible this investigation. They're doing damage control rather than what really needs to be done, what any ethical paper would do, which is to investigate Gelman himself and punish them.
Yeah.